glad to be able to add my perspective as a homemaker, as I usually prefer to call myself. First things first, my name is Daphine Byamukama. I've been married to my husband. His name is Byamukama. We'll be making 6 years this year in October. We have 2 children. The firstborn is Ababo, who's 3 years old, and the second one is Abasa, who is bubbling in the corner there. My husband and I have a ministry called Veracity Found, where we desire to equip the church, and the idea is to also, I prefer to look at my notes. The idea behind the ministry is researching and resourcing for church renewal, basically to equip the Ugandan church to be ready for mission. And we do this, one, by having an expository Bible study fellowship every Monday and Wednesday from 6 to 8. Some of you have been there. The second way is through a Worldview Wednesday podcast, where we cast the light on cultural issues through the biblical perspective. And then thirdly, we also do research on various issues that are affecting the Ugandan church. The most recent one has been the report on Phaneroo. If you come across a report, an 80-page report on Phaneroo, the Phaneroo Fellowship, that's Veracity Found in partnership with Alpha. And then personally, I have also been a part of that by starting a women's community Bible study, where we go through the scriptures biblically. We go through the book from the first chapter to the last, and this is my second year starting that. We are currently going through the book of Genesis, and it's been absolutely great to have women come together and study the word and discuss. I always find it very interesting that men usually discuss these things and go into the depths of them, but then when it comes to women, we seem to be in any other thing except theology and the Bible, and yet we impact the society in very invisible but very magnificent ways. So it is such a privilege for me to start that Bible study. Marvin invited me to share my perspective as a homemaker in light of education and the home. And I would like to start by sharing my story, and also then bring in a bit of, not just a bit, but a whole lot of scripture in terms of the home and the purpose of the woman, but also the man. I have to say that my journey has been very progressive. I can't really say that when I was being born, I look forward to staying at home. Like every other woman, I saw myself climbing a certain ladder somewhere. But God has a way of providentially leading us to where He desires us to be. So I come at it with a lot of humility, because this conversation tends to hurt women, because it's like we are saying they're not supposed to bring in money. It always comes off like, sit down, shut up, keep quiet, don't contribute, don't do anything, let the man do it all. So I want to come at it with a lot of humility, because I'm also learning, I'm also growing. I've been surrounded by a lot of women who have poured their wisdom into me. So yeah, that's my confession there. So I don't have all the answers, but I hope this will be a conversational starter, depending on where each one of us is. But also, lastly, I'm also glad that we have brothers amongst us. Because usually the last time we had this conversation on the women's group at church, there's a lady who's almost getting married. She's like, where are the men? Where are the men? We are battling with this thing, but are the men thinking about their contribution to me finally sacrificing? And I thought that was a good point, because I think that decision also has to be a collective decision to encourage the woman to be whatever she is with the husband's input. So I'm really, really glad that we are having men here as well. So my story begins with me being born by my mother. She gave birth to me when she was still in school. And so because of that, I was raised by my grandmother, and my my grandmother braved the journey and sent my mother back to school. So, as you know these stories, my dad was absent, and I have to say that he actually passed away without me seeing him at all. So I grew up with my grandmother tending to me. My mom had to go back to school, and I talked to a lot of women, and they usually have Senga sessions, like towards university there, your auntie starts to say, oh, is that man? Why are you getting married and all of that? I didn't have any of that. For me, it was no biggie, marriage, yeah, we shall see it whenever it comes. The purpose is to get you a degree and get going. You should be independent and all of that. So the idea of homekeeping, homeschooling, none of that was under my radar at all until I met my husband, and it was in the premarital counseling session where it was about who is going to do what and all these things. And he talked about homeschooling, and I looked at the man. Oh, it's okay, we shall discuss that another time. That was me trying to avoid it at all costs. And looking back, he actually was serious, but I never thought about it, I never even imagined it. So I said, we'll figure it out as time goes on. So I get married, and then at that time I was in my banking profession, and the juggling begins, you know, going, punching the hours, then come back home and all these things. And I remember my friends, when they did the bridal shower, they had this talk where it was about, now you're a woman, you have to juggle it all. Career, don't let it slide, and also don't let your home slide. And well, you are in the emotions of you're in love, so you're not really listening, and yeah, the marriage finds you. And then reality hit me. I was usually so exhausted. I was just so exhausted. And my husband, as you know him, Muchad, and to say that I'm tired. And it was just the beginning. So this whole juggling thing, you know, the whole mental exhaustion and the whole counsel was, you know, put the bank aside. When you come home, find a way to relax. And honestly, there was no way to relax. The banking work is too intense that sometimes I even dream of the files that I didn't work on. So it became very difficult for me to do that whole juggling thing. And I told my maid of honor that, you know what, Jolly, honestly, I don't think I'll do this. I can't imagine the whole juggling and then bringing in 1, 2, 3 children. I don't know how women do that. I commend them, but it was just very, very difficult. But then the other factor was, what impact am I making in this office? I don't see the impact. I was approaching my 3rd year and I just struggled. The 2 ways I saw people doing it, either you climb through the ladders or you find another job, or you know, it's like progress or success was based on how fat your salary is. So I talked to my husband, maybe I should, you know, apply for that job, and he would ask me why. And I'm like, more money? Progress? And it's like, where are the scriptures there? And I didn't have an answer, because I didn't. So then, but at the same time, the Lord was warming me up towards ministry, which is where we are now. I saw my heart drawing towards being a part of the women's ministry at church, being involved here and there, but the job, you know, you're so exhausted. You're hardly available for all these things. So how do you put it together? So eventually, some of you may know, the Lord opened up that door for us to go to the States, and we went there for 3 years. My husband was doing a master's, and I had time, to breathe after the bank, but also time to think about where God would have me be. And it was a difficult 3 years for me intellectually, because I needed to think, how are you going to apply that degree? Where are you going to put your energy? And the Lord was faithful, and I think around that time I met a lot of homeschoolers, because in America the homeschooling movement is huge. There are a lot of women already doing that, and I started having conversations with Daphine. Those conversations were very helpful to help me think about the home and, you know, just how to do it. So So yeah, that's kind of where my heart, that's where my story is. And so when I look back on my decision to be a stay-at-home mother, it has been that progressive journey. When I was coming here, I talked to my mother and I asked her, she's been very much a career lady. So I asked her, if there's one thing you regret starting your career young, of course you're a single mother, you had to go and make the money. For me to go to school, she had to take care of me. And the one thing she said was, I didn't have enough time with you. And I thought that was very helpful for me, even when I was coming to talk about this. And so that's her not having time for me, but also looking at the contrast between my mother and my grandmother. I owe my career as a homemaker on my grandmother because I remember the attentiveness she gave us. All my uncles look forward to our village home because of my grandmother's presence. She didn't ask for a salary every month for staying home, but her impact, her food, her listening ear, and all of that, you cannot pay a salary for that. So just looking at that, and it caught me, and I said, this is who I want to become. This is, when my children are older, I want to be looked at that woman who poured your sacrifices into my home. So I compare those two women, but also not to take away from my mother. My mother does refugee work, and I was talking to her about the issue of juggling and all these things, and she told me that, you know, the struggle we are having today is, she worked in an organization where she was supposed to counsel a lot of people who have been affected by gender-based violence. Now, not only women, I mean, even these days men are being beat on left, right, and center. So she says, when I look at the issues I've had to counsel, there's a lot of selfishness that men and women envisage in their families, or in terms of the way they look at children. She was saying, we live in a culture where children are like a trophy. We want to give birth to children anywhere, anyhow, without thinking about the decision of that. So she said, a lot of issues I deal with, you look at it and the issue comes from the family. They were raised without any love. No one was there. The parents are busy. Everyone is on their career track, keeping up. The children are raising themselves. Some of them are, moved from relative to relative. The relatives sexually violate them, and the children have no space. And I think COVID really brought this issue up, because we are having pregnant girls under 12 who have been violated by their own fathers. What a blasphemy, So imagine how that child is going to grow up. How are they going to think about marriage? How are they going to think about the home and the sacrifices it entails? So that mindset, and so, things like I'll give birth to 10 children through different men or through different women and whatever. So that kind of got my attention to, and it brought me to the question, how do we view the home? And how do we view work? What is that worldview? Godfrey and Jackie talk about that worldview. What is behind how we view the home and the work? And we have to admit that the world has indeed shaped the way we look at home, the way we look at the home, the way we look at work. And I've looked at, I wanted us to look at how the world shapes us. One of the ways is, number one, the way we think about work. Usually when we are done with school, it's about my personal goals and looking at work merely as a tool through which I can make as much money. You don't find a lot of children thinking about, what am I good at? Where would I love to leave an impact in society? They look at work in terms of money. We work for money. We also don't see work as an opportunity to serve others or to influence them for God. We are looking at money, that fat salary, or whether it's a business or whatever it is. You're thinking, you're checking progress dependent on the income that is coming in. And so, of course, because of that mindset, I have a lot of people who look down my choice to be a stay-home mother. It's like, what are you doing there? Where's the money? So you don't have to save. How much do you have on your savings account? And everything is defined by that. The success markers in Uganda right now is Olinao Kachi, physical, tangible possessions, a car, land. I'm not land in that village of yours. No, you have to have land here somewhere in town, and then you expand. And things that are tangible. And yet the scriptures really have a completely different idea. Success in the biblical world is faithfulness with what God has given you. It might bring up these physical things, yes, but ultimately it is faithfulness to the scripture, to the biblical worldview. Work is supposed to be missional. It's supposed to be helping us think, how am I influencing others for the gospel? How am I, whatever workstation you are at, what is my work ethic? I normally tell people that people are afraid of employing Walokole because we are the last to punch in, and we are the last to punch in at work, and we are the first to get out of work. We do shoddy work. We are not to be trusted. And yet it is through that work ethic that we can actually envisage the gospel. I have a quote here from Caroline. She says this. She says that in her book, The Measure of Success, uncovering the biblical perspective on women, work, and the home, she writes that accomplishment is the psychological reward for hard work. Money is the tangible reward for hard work. Godly influence is the spiritual reward for hard work. And she adds and says that in the biblical narrative, work is a core labor of love. Tasks done in partnership with a gracious God who uses our labors to bless others. So that is how we're supposed to be looking at the work we are all doing. So if we look at work in that regard, then whether you are working in an office, whether you are working a job, whether you are welding, whether you are cleaning the KCCA compound, you are doing great. You are being missional. You are serving others to make it better. So across the board, whether it's in the home, whether it's outside the home, God is being glorified because you are partnering with Him to serve others and to influence them. But then the other way that I think we also need to look at what has shaped the way we come at homeschooling, education, and the home is the experience, the past experience we've had. I love Godfrey's analogy, asking us how many have been raised by fathers and all these things. Humanly speaking, we tend to walk in the steps of those who have gone ahead of us. You will normally, when you get married, you will most likely imitate what your mother did, what your father did. So it becomes very difficult to imitate if you had no one in that picture, if you had no one in that position. And I have to say that unfortunately, our generation, for the most part, is an orphaned generation. We've had parents who have been absentee parents, or at bare minimum, they've given us the shelter, food, school fees, and that is it. So children have sort of raised themselves, and we have unfortunately carried this on because we don't ask ourselves, is this right? We tend to ask, does this work? Even when I went to boarding school, what is the problem with boarding school? I came out fine. But have you looked at the consequences, the far-reaching consequences of that action? Yes, it works, but in terms of the biblical perspective, is it right? We don't ask ourselves that. And then, of course, the idea of blaming teachers, the child is not fine, you blame that teacher is the problem. You have parents moving children from school to school rather than paying attention to what the teacher actually is saying, or even things like, I'm going to replace my responsibility with house girls, The house help can help, but she's not the owner of the home. So you're having a lot of parents, both men and women, simply relaxing whatever career track because there is a house help, and yet by the mere word house help, she's simply helping. She doesn't bear the vision for which you and your spouse were married, which is to raise a godly seed. So that kind of mindset has shaped us a lot, and we are not taking time to pause on how then can I do differently. The other thing, of course, in all of this is the abuse and negligence that people have seen growing up. So you find things like adultery is almost celebrated in our culture, I have to say. That you find, yes, there are women who have taken it, okay, traditionally, that I'm going to stay home, let the husband bring in an income, and you see that there are so many stories where the husband, after this wife has given in, I don't know, 40, 50 years, and he's divorcing the wife. And so the daughter sits there and says, my mother has been the epitome of sacrifice. So there is no man who's going to tell me to sacrifice for you. I'm sorry. Let me go make my money that I can rely on, but not on the love of this man. Or even vice versa, women have also contributed to the whole mambo jumbo. So this abuse, so when we open the scriptures, people are not receiving them because of this abuse, because of this background that they have grown up in, but also these messages that have shaped the way we look at success, the way we look at progress, and all of that. I think most recently in Kenya, there was a furious debate that came up when I think a judge said that housewives should start being paid. And it got the Twitter handles really busy and all of that. And so I asked my grandmother, what do you think about this? And she said, you see, our society is unraveling. Family was supposed to be something you could depend on. But you're seeing people even wives who have sacrificed, like I've mentioned, you find that the husband is throwing her out. So, yeah, you might as well give her the money. So that was her perspective. But I think the principle is to show that the family is being unraveled today. The choices that we are making, both the husband and wife, they are very selfish. And so now the children are basically having no examples whatsoever. And I think we do well to refer to the scriptures on how then we ought to look at the home. I think Godfrey mentioned, I loved his presentation on the family and society, and I would also like to add in a bit of that and give a little history. Before the Industrial Revolution, the Industrial Revolution was a period in the 19th century where machinery was being now part of the economy. Before that, the home was the place of production, as he rightly explained. The family was its own economy. So you would find that the husband and wife and children were that business unit. So it wasn't this place where you just go to relax. No. As a friend of mine said, the homes were like the little factories, So that is, and because of that, it was also a place of instruction. Because you're spending time with your children, shaping them, and making sure you are preparing them for the reality around them. And you see a lot of that even in the scriptures, as Godfrey mentioned. When we look at Proverbs 31, usually women come at that and say, they use it just to affirm, or even women are supposed to be in business and go, in other words, again, the accolade saint. No, that woman in Proverbs 31 was in her home. She was doing all that work in her home. She was a businesswoman. But she served her husband, she served her children. Everything was there within her vicinity. So the Bible sits well within that history, that the home was that place where they produced whatever it was, depending on what the home was involved in, whether the family was that of carpenters, whether it was a family of fighters, whether it was a family of whatever it is. It was production. But now we look at the home as a place of consumption, and it's very common on Instagram, seeing a lot of styles of how the home should look like, People keep updating, these curtains, every year you're putting in new curtains, all those things. That's not how the home was intended. The home was a place of instruction and therefore the first place of discipleship. Okay, so I would like to say that the theme of what I'm going to say now is that the home is a strategic place for evangelism, where the parents come together to instruct their children for the home. And I think a number of scriptures have already been described here. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 4 to 9 and many others. But I think I would like to read Psalm 78. Godfrey mentioned a bit of it, but I think I would like us to read there. Psalm 78 verses 1 to 8. Reads, "Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old, things that we have heard and known, that our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might, and the wonders that he has done. He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children, so that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, that they should not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God." And that's where the passage ends. This is one of the longest psalms, and this person is basically talking about what happened when one of the generations failed to hold on to the legacy that their fathers passed on. He's talking about what Godfrey and Jackie mentioned, Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 4. That passage where it talks about how the Lord God is one, therefore you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind, and you will teach these children, you will teach these things to your children continually. That is the Jewish confession of faith. And it's referred to as the Shema. And the Shema is a Jewish prayer that serves as a centerpiece of the morning and evening. So every time a Jewish man or woman would be praying, they would refer back to that. And that was the center of every Jewish home. To not only love the Lord with all their hearts, but also with their mind and all that they are. And that was supposed to be passed on to the next generation, to hold up the precepts of God. But one generation lost it, and they didn't pass it on. And this is why Israel's story actually is not as good as it turned out to be, because they forgot. They forgot what God had taught them. In one of the books, I think Judges, it begins, I think it ends where it talks about how every man did as they pleased, because they forgot to pass on the legacy that was entrusted to them. And our Christian worldview is based on that Jewish foundation. We are supposed to pass on what has been entrusted in us. We are supposed to raise our children, both men and women, both husbands and mothers, to know the law of God, so they can put their hope in God. And I'll also read Titus chapter 2. I'll read chapter 2. Chapter 2, from verse 1 to verse 5. I'd like someone else to read, I'd like some volunteers to read these other verses. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 8. Any volunteers? Yes, please. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 8. Ephesians chapter 6 verse 4. Nick. Proverbs 3 verses 11 to 12. Yes, please. Proverbs 31 verse 1. The gentleman behind Godfrey. Proverbs 31 verse 1. Then 2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 14 to 15. David. And then lastly, Proverbs chapter 30 verses 7. Yes. So I'll begin by reading Titus. But as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness. Older women, likewise, are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so to train the young women to love their husbands, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. Proverbs 1 verse 8.
My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother.
Ephesians 6.
Fathers, do not stir up anger of your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord.
2 Timothy.
2 Timothy 3:14 and 15. But as for you, continue in what you have learned and have firmly believed, knowing from whom you learned it, how from childhood you have been acquainted with sacred writing, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus.
Yes.
Proverbs 31. The words of King Nominal, utterance which his mother told him.
Proverbs 3:11-12 says, My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son delights in.
Thank you. So the first thing that I would like to mention is the place of the woman in the home. The scriptures are very clear that the woman is in charge of the home, in the sense that the welfare of the home is entrusted to her, as we've just read in Titus 2. But the wife doesn't do that on her own. She is under the leadership of her husband. And that partnership then is the basis for how parenting is done. You've listened to the various scriptures that talk about how fathers should not provoke their children, how you should not forsake the mother's teaching. When a home does not have the mother in it, it's basically empty. There is nowhere the children or the husband can come and find shelter. And that is the example that is passed on. But these things are not just, we don't stay at home just for the sake of beauty. We do this so that we can glorify the gospel, the word of God. You see how that passage ends. The young women are trained to love their husbands and children, so that, it ends with this, so that the word of God may not be reviled. When you look at that then, the home takes its rightful place as the first place where the gospel is going to sink into the hearts of the children. It's not out there. When we think about evangelism, Matthew chapter 28, when Jesus is talking about disciples, we should also look at the home. How are we present? How is the mother present? How is the father involved? Walking alongside the wife to see whether the children are in turn, whether they are listening and obeying. It's not just something that the woman alone should do. And you find a lot of people who think that it's like, I can do my own thing. That's not how it is in the scriptures. Yes, primarily the mother, the wife, should be invested, but so should the father be in various ways. And the various ways in which the fathers were involved is by equally instructing the children. That even as the mothers taught, we see here in Proverbs 31, that these words were given to a son by a mother. Yet the whole, historically, the book of Proverbs was a manual that the Jewish father used to instruct the son. So that means the father spent a lot of time in that home. He didn't just come to rest. He didn't just come to do as he pleases. So even as women become wives, it's not up to her to come up with a vision. It's the husband and the wife who should sit together and come up with that vision. And it goes all the way back to Genesis. Paul is writing with that Jewish understanding of Genesis, as Godfrey put it. God gives the instruction to the man to tend and keep. In other words, the man is supposed to be is supposed to be stewarding his strength to serve his family. That means he has to be involved. He has to be knowing how are the children, who is in tune with the mother's instructions. When I'm so exhausted, and usually my husband comes back home from wherever, I tell him, take care of that son of yours. And I'm within my rights because he's equally the father. And eventually Abahu is going to grow up to be a man. He's going to be looking to my husband, not so much to me. So that partnership, even as the wife is involved in the home, even as she's primarily responsible for the home, the man's overhead and responsibility and stewardship should be more than bringing in the money. Okay? So that's the partnership that I'd like to present. And then the idea of women working at home. The principle there is that the moment a woman gets married, your first priority is the home. Whatever you do, you have to make sure that your home is in place. For me, that meant that I'm going to make my home the priority by working from home, by being a homemaker. I do many other things, but primarily I consider myself a homemaker. For others, whatever it is, you go out, but whatever you go to do, your home must be your priority. How is that job? How is that business improving your service at home? If whatever you are doing is taking away from the home, sister, it's time to reconsider. It's time to reconsider. And unfortunately, in our schools today, we are not told these things as women. The world is about celebrating equality in the sense that, oh, there are male doctors, oh, there are female doctors, oh, there are male engineers, oh, there are women engineers. I asked my husband, the ladies you studied with in construction engineering, how many of them are in the fields in that hard work of the sun? Some of these careers are so detrimental to the home, so detrimental. And you have to either ask the Lord to help you use that skill in a way that is familiar to the home, or many times you have to deny yourself and find something else to do. In as long as you have been married and you are a Christian woman. So whatever it is that you are doing, how is that making you more available for your children? And the other aspect then, how the men come in. My mom was saying about the selfishness that men and women have. Most of the time people get married without discussing the personal goals they have. The woman might have a skill that she really sees she would love to do that cannot be replicated in the home, and the man also has his own personal goals. But these things, they don't talk about them. They get married, everyone starts following his career track. And no one is sacrificing for anyone. And who loses then? The children. Because there's no parent who is putting their personal goals on a pause for the sake of the big vision of the family. Same thing with the husbands. And this might be difficult to hear, gentlemen, but your careers equally affect the wife. Very much so, and the children. As joking about it with a friend when we came in Dakar, that when my husband started his PhD studies, the school had a meeting where I was involved. And at first I'm like, why am I in this meeting? But then as the rubber hit the road, I realized that his PhD work was really hectic. He puts in a lot of time, and that affects the family time. So even in my complaining, we had to sit down and talk about it and say, we agreed that I was going to pursue this PhD, and you supported it. You know, so I had to sit back, and it was a place for humility that I think it's time for me to allow him to do this, because he mentioned this. So whatever gifts or things that you want to pursue, they have to be considered in light of the family goal. Whatever you do outside the home is going to affect everything. So husbands should notify their wives whatever you want to do. If you are, let's say, a banker and suddenly you are a CEO, that is going to affect everything. The weekends are going to be out. You're going to have late meetings, which means your children are going to rarely see you. You're going to rarely have any devotional time. And surprisingly, that also includes ministry. If you are doing too much that your wife is like, Mommy, there is some balance there that needs to be kept for the sake of your marriage, but also for the sake of the children. Okay, so let's think about that. And the last time I spoke, they asked a question in the Q&A, and this person was asking, why do we have nominal Christians? And by nominal Christians, they mean Sunday-going Christians who don't really influence anywhere. And I was talking about how the faith is supposed to be passed on. But faith can't be passed on by absentee parents. You can't instruct your children when you hardly see them in the week, when you hardly sit down with your husband to talk about the changing circumstances. Okay? So we have Christians today who basically are just Sunday going, and so this talk of devotional, sitting down with your children, it sounds so alien because they've never seen anyone do it. So it is now up to us, we who have rediscovered the scriptures, which have been clear, but somehow culture sort of covers them up, and we do the usual thing. We have to rediscover these scriptures and be more intentional with our children. Whatever our goals are, whatever we think we are called in, the home must be priority. And I would like to also share a few examples of a few friends. I have a friend whose husband is a landscaper, and I was talking to him, and I was asking him, what about money, the home, and all these things? And he said, that for me, I decided, even when I was going into marriage, that I'm not going to take certain work beyond certain boundaries. Yes, I'm going to get this landscaping job or carpentry job in Masaka or wherever, but I don't take those jobs because I need to spend time with my children. And for me, it was very, very humbling to hear a man say that. So even as the wife is equally involved in the home, and the home is huge. People will ask, what do you do at home? There's a lot that can be done in the home. The home is actually more hectic. In fact, I tell my friends that my bank job was only preparing me for the work that I do at home. It's very, you are diverse, you are involved in so many things at the same time. Now, even adding Godfrey and his wife now who homeschool, you do a whole lot. So when we think about the home, let's think about it in that wider perspective, that it is the center base from which the children should be raised holistically to then go out and influence the world for Christ in whatever career track they will be in. But they will have started from the home. And that can only be possible if each one of us, if we are married, to start rethinking our goals. What is our family vision? What is this family about? What am I good at? Let's stick to one thing and invest in it. We are living in an economy, we call it a gig economy. We started like a business, we're homeschooling, we call actually all these things. But it takes away from so much. We have to uniquely ask ourselves, what have you called me to do? ask the Lord to provide opportunities. I know the economy is up and about, but there is so much at stake here. As Marvin talked about, our children are going to be the MPs of tomorrow. But how are we going to raise responsible, God-fearing men if we are not in the home? If we are simply trusting the public school, yet the school is supposed to be aiding your journey. It's supposed to help you to create this partnership between you and your child's teacher to see how you can shape them together so that they can grow up. So this idea of the woman being in charge of the home is not just an independent invite to the wife and the mother, but it's also an invitation to the father and the husband to endeavor that even as the woman is sacrificing and committing to the home, the husband and the father is equally involved so that the children can equally see this collective unit of people who are committed to themselves as a marriage, but also they are committed to the children and the whole family. So holistically then, whatever is pursued is not pursued at the cost of the family. The family has to be considered, whatever you're doing, whatever gift it is, even if it means to pause that thing, even if it means to give it up completely. Because if we are faithful to God, He's going to lead us. Because ultimately, it's about faithfulness to Him. It's about influencing our context for Christ, not so much to add to ourselves possessions and all these things. So, in the biblical perspective, then, the home is priority. It's priority in whatever we do because that shapes who we are. That shapes our children. That shapes the people that we do what? We become. And even, you might be here and you are single. And I would like to encourage single brothers and sisters, find couples that you admire. Walk alongside them. Be involved in their family homes and see how they are working out that journey. Those examples will prepare you for when the Lord calls you for marriage. Marriage is not just about enjoyment. It is a place of responsibility. And I think that's what the scriptures teach us. And if we think of it like that, then the home will ultimately become primary and therefore will be successful in as far as our evangelistic means are concerned. Because people see how we are faithfully taking our marriages seriously. They're seeing how we are shaping our children, not only intellectually, but also character-wise. Thank you very much.